Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the absolutely astonishing story of a young girl who inherited a small island nation and somehow left behind a sprawling global empire. We're talking about a monarch whose reign lasted for more than 6 decades. Honestly, she's a woman whose very name became completely synonymous with an entire era of human history.
So just picture this for a second. Imagine waking up at just 18 years old and discovering you are suddenly the ruler of the most powerful nation on Earth. No pressure, right? Well, that is exactly what happened on the morning of June 20th, 1837. Victoria woke up to the life-changing news that her uncle, King William IV, had passed away. I mean, at an age when most young people are just trying to figure out who they are, she was literally handed the keys to a kingdom.
And you know what makes this even more incredible? She wasn't even supposed to be there. Born Alexandrina Victoria at Kensington Palace on May 24th, 1819, she was originally fifth in succession to the throne. Almost nobody expected her to actually wear the crown. But a series of totally unexpected royal deaths completely redrew the map of the British monarchy, placing this young girl directly next in line. Which brings us to our first main topic, the Kensington system, a controlled childhood. You see, her early life wasn't exactly the fairy tale you might expect. It was entirely defined by this incredibly strict set of rules known as the Kensington system, which was a highly controlled environment carefully designed by her mother and her advisors. Under this system, Victoria was basically never allowed to be alone, living an incredibly sheltered and scrutinized life. Yet, despite all those heavy restrictions, she somehow forged an iron will. On her very first morning as queen, she met with top government officials, and she wasn't dripping in jewels either. Historical accounts tell us she was dressed super simply, just wearing a white dress and a black shawl. But she radiated this calm confidence that was way beyond her years, and that sheer determination carried her straight into Westminster Abbey, where she was officially crowned 1 year later, in June of 1838, as millions celebrated a totally new era. Moving right along to love and modernization, a royal partnership. In 1840, she married her cousin, Prince Albert. Now, this turned into one of history's most famous royal love stories for sure. But Albert became so much more than just a husband. He became her absolute closest advisor, really a true working partner in the incredibly heavy business of ruling a nation. Together, Victoria and Albert had 9 children. And as those kids grew up, their descendants married into royal families all across the European continent. It was this vast, complex web of familial alliances that earned Victoria a very famous and, honestly, highly accurate historical nickname, the Grandmother of Europe. Her family tree quite literally became the political map of the continent. Now, Victoria's reign coincided with one of the most dramatic periods of rapid change in human history. We're talking massive, sweeping modernization. Suddenly, steam engines were powering huge factories. Expanding railway networks were shrinking the distances between cities, and telegraphs, they were letting messages travel across oceans, connecting continents like never before. Add in modern sanitation systems, the fascinating rise of photography, and the dawn of electricity, it's just mind-blowing. Science, technology, and social reforms were completely transforming Britain into the world's leading industrial power. So let's look at the impact of that with our next section, the global British Empire, unprecedented expansion. Fueled by all that rapid industrialization, the empire reached its absolute greatest size under Victoria's rule. We're talking about a sprawling network of territories extending deep into Asia, Africa, North America, and Oceania. The empire on which the sun never sets. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. It became wildly popular during her reign, and the crazy thing is, it wasn't just a metaphor. It was literally true. Because the empire was so incredibly vast, spread across so many different time zones around the globe, it was always daytime somewhere within its borders. But we have to look at the whole picture here, because the expansion of the British Empire was incredibly complex. On one hand, it brought massive global trade, expanded infrastructure, and vast technological influence around the world. But on the exact same token, it was intrinsically tied to the harsh realities of colonial rule and ongoing regional conflicts. It's a duality that historians still heavily debate today, reflecting the profound and honestly very complicated lasting impact of her reign on global populations. Fast forward a bit to the year 1876, and Victoria's global influence was further cemented into law. It was in this specific year that she was officially declared Empress of India. It was a title that symbolically tied the monarch even closer to the vast overseas territories under British control.
So, the empire is rapidly expanding, and its power is practically unchecked on the global stage. But what happens when the queen suddenly loses her closest advisor? We really have to ask this question to understand the sudden, very dark pivot in Victoria's personal life. Right at the absolute height of all this progress, her world was about to completely shatter.
This brings us to tragedy and solitude, the death of Albert. In 1861, a completely devastating tragedy struck the royal household. Prince Albert, the love of her life and the co-architect of this modernizing Britain, passed away at the remarkably young age of just 42. Victoria was utterly heartbroken. I mean, she withdrew almost entirely from public life, plunging into a deep mourning that would essentially define the rest of her days. She wore black clothing for many years, creating history's most famous and visible example of royal grief. Yet, what's so fascinating here is that despite this crippling personal loss, she stoically continued to fulfill her daily duties as monarch behind closed doors.
If we step back and map out her 6-decade reign, we see this incredible, dramatic evolution. From a young girl ascending the throne in 1837 to finding love in 1840, losing it in 1861, and eventually re-emerging as a venerable global figurehead by the late 1890s. Which perfectly sets up our final chapter, a modern legacy, the Diamond Jubilee. By 1897, Britain threw a massive celebration marking her 60 years on the throne. As she aged, Victoria had become the ultimate symbol of stability and continuity. Leaders, soldiers, and representatives from all across the vast empire traveled to London just to pay their respects, demonstrating the incredible reach of British power at the close of the 19th century. When she finally passed away on January 22, 1901, to be succeeded by her son Edward VII, the contrast of her life's bookends was just staggering. Think about it. She began as an inexperienced teenager, inheriting a small, largely agrarian kingdom, and she ended her 63-year rule at the age of 81 as an empress, leaving behind a completely transformed modern and industrialized global empire. The world she left was practically unrecognizable from the one she was born into.
Through sweeping industrial revolutions, massive technological breakthroughs, unprecedented global expansion, and heartbreaking personal tragedy, the legacy of Queen Victoria shaped the very age we live in right now. More than a century after her passing, her influence is still deeply woven into the fabric of our society. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of the modern conveniences, global borders, and societal structures we take for granted today can be traced straight back to the reign of this one incredible woman?